Oh my gosh, this is so fantastic. You have done another week of warp gates, safe to be worthy, which is another really powerful of like, oh my gosh, that feeling of not being worthy, and then to put on top of that, it's not even safe to start feeling worthy. I mean, how much of a break in your life is that? And you're starting to release that. So let's go back, let's review what happened on day one of safe to be worthy. We did that to mom and dad, so we cleared that. How was that when you kicked off the warp gates? Looking now, because you've done another 6 days after that. 6 days more of those warp gates, clearing that out. So you came in, mom and dad, like, fresh and new, clearing that of like, oh my gosh, this is the first time we're gonna start addressing this on a deep level. What is it like now looking back? What was the experience of it happening? But then also, what are some new realizations you might not have got on that day? Because we're gonna mine that gold. And then what happened that 4 to 12 hours after that? Also, we're also looking back like, wow, maybe there's some stuff I held on to. Because worthy, that's a huge issue. I mean, we're not going light here. There's no break weeks. I mean, we are going hardcore on super intense, tense, fundamental ways in which our being gets inverted. And we're starting there, then everything else bubbles up where your life changes. But we want to change the core pieces, as opposed to like kind of change something on the surface, which then it just bubbles up and puts it back the way it was. Get into a little stress and your unconscious like, well, let's rewrite, let's look at the plate. Oh, this is the program, let's rewrite that. So then your life goes back to the way it was. And I kind of liken that to like circling the toilet bowl of life. You do all this work, but you always kind of like come back to the same toilet bowl. We're changing that. We're changing the script. We're going to the core issues of like being worthy. Like, it's going to be safe to feel worthy. Or first we're going to do be worthy. Safe to be worthy. To actually, you can start feeling that inherent worth that you have without that being a death sentence. So it's huge. So we did mom and dad. So what was that? What was the 4 to 12 hours after that? Then, like we did for the previous weeks, we went with your grandparents. So your grandparents on your mother's side. So what was that with your grandparents on your mother's side? How was grandmother? How was grandfather with worthy? Now it's worthy. Like, what was that dynamic when we started to release that? And hopefully we're also building that, like, this is what your parents had too. This is what your mom had. This is what she had to grow up into, right? And you kind of realize like, whoa, I'm starting to release that, but that was all placed on her too, right? First you released what you learned from her, and then released what you learned from your grandparent, like kind of seeing that like change of like all these pre-programmed rules that you had to follow. How would that invert your mom's beingness? How did it invert your beingness? You're starting to waking up of like, hey, wait, what do I have inside, right? That was grandparents on the mother side. Then we did, day 3 kind of the safe to be worthy, right? On the grandparent side, on the father side, what was that? When you kicked off the warp gates, what did you feel there? Like, what did it feel like going in? And maybe you didn't notice it. Maybe you just kicked them off and went. Now looking back, you're like, oh, wow. I was feeling this, whether it was an anticipation, maybe it was a fear. Like, what was it going in? Now looking back, after doing the clearings, after getting on the other side of that, because even just doing the warp gate on that day is majorly clearing out stuff. So like, what's your new perspective there? And then your 4 to 12 hours after that, what happened that day? What new realizations did you possibly get on that day, looking back? Maybe you knew you got them. We're just going to reestablish that you got them. Like, you're like, oh my gosh, that was a game changer day. Or looking back of like, oh my gosh, it was a game changer day. I didn't realize that. I totally took a new pivot in my life. I totally took my life to a new way. I totally started something new I never started before, right? Just notice that we're just going to realize I'm like, wow, this is you doing this. This is you doing this healing work. Your unconscious mind doing this massive healing, and notice the change in a very short amount of time. Also, like, how are you feeling about your parents? What's that dynamic? What's changed there? What's switched? Of like, whoa, because when it's unconscious, it's locked in place. Now you're starting to change it. It's coming up in your conscious mind of like, whoa, I'm having some flexibility here, right? Okay, so then day 4, that was to the siblings again, or if we were only child, we're clearing that, safe to be worthy, big. What happened on those clearings, right? How far did you get? Like, if you have a lot of brothers, a lot of sisters, and maybe you only did 2 on each side, but did you get further this time? Or it's like, whoa, no, it was so intense on just one, the couple of days before, but whoa, it was really intense. And that's, that's just part of the dynamic that you're born into of like, wow, that was really intense. I didn't know it was going to be so intense. And you still, you've got the warp gate. You go back, you're going to run them different. You're going to go through more of the siblings. You have this right here. You can run them at any time, but just notice what happened that day. right? And what happened if you did the only child? I'm like, okay, what happened on the day when we did siblings for safe to be worthy? What was that dynamic? What happened? And then also, the 4 to 12 hours after, because it's not just when you run it. I mean, it's the 4 to 12 hours when it's really getting after it and it's kind of start ramping up. It's kind of like, first you just feel it a little bit and it's just a little bit what's going on, right? Then your unconscious is going to get after it and just kind of, it's paying attention of like, okay, you cool with this? Or you're starting to freak out. It's looking, it's like, oh, you're starting to freak out, right? But we want to look and say like, oh man, I freaked out. Then you want to have that communication where you say, hey, unconscious, I'm freaking out. Go at 1/2 power. And that's, it's so huge. It's never like a step back. It's such a huge step forward for you to realize that it's getting intense and then to communicate to your unconscious, because you build such a kind of like a bridge of trust where your unconscious is like, okay, yeah, you're coming up to speed, because your unconscious knows what's going on. But then when it sees you consciously up to speed, it's like, oh, okay, you ready to go faster. So that's what warp gates are all about. So then day 5, that was when we did it to non-biological parents, right? And the people that were like a parent to you, we can do those too. So like, what was the dynamic? Because you've done a bunch of weeks now. It was like there are more people that came into play that like, they were like, oh wow, they're like a non-biological parent. You can go back if some new person showed up, like they were like a parent to me. What if I do lovable now, right? But you did worthy with them. Like notice that, hey, worthy is one that was like, ding, ding, ding. Your unconscious is like, guess what? Let's do worthy to this person. And just notice your unconscious is talking to you. This is coming. It didn't just pop into your head like randomly. Your unconscious gave it to you like, hey, look, worthy to this person. Let's clear this. Let's do this. Let's do the warp gate on that. So we're starting to build that two-way communication, because that's where all your gifts are coming through. So it's really cool. So now we also did self-referencing energetic chains, which is huge. That is like huge. That's where we kind of like overlay all the stuff that we learned about this chains to like make sure they stay. Even though the other people might be changing, our chains help keep us like that set person, that set identity of like, this is who I am, but that's not who you really are. That's like who you are doing all the rules that aren't for your best interest. Like all those rules of like, how do I keep all these rules in place? And we're getting rid of it. It's like, no. Well, let's do your being of lightness. Let's do what God put you in here with and how you are in the perfectness of that. And let's kind of get rid of some of those rules that are saying you have to do it this way, right? So that's what the self-referencing chains clear out. So how was that? How was it going into those? What was the experience of clearing out some of those self-referencing energetic chains on safe to be worthy? Like actually you can start going to worthy. What was that like? And what was, also the 4 to 12 hours, maybe start getting some distinctions of like, hey, got intense that day. Wait, was that from the self-referencing energetic chain, or was it from the non-biological parent that I was running, right? And start getting that nuance. Your unconscious wants you to start building that bridge and realizing, where is this coming from? What is happening? Like, oh, that was me change. That was stuff like what I put on me. I'm letting that go. Or, oh no, that was something I got from a non-biological parent. And now looking back, you maybe didn't have it in that moment. But now looking back, after doing the clearing, you have a new awareness, right? You can look back and be like, oh, it was that, which is gold. It's not a mistake. It's not like, oh, I didn't get it in the moment. Oh, no. You got it in this moment, which is going to translate, which your unconscious is realizing like, oh, you got it. Yes. Now we go faster. And then our 6th day of, safe to be worthy was where we did the meditation. We went through all of them. It's like, did you get through all of them? Was it intense? Or was it just like, I just didn't, it was too much. I only did one and I stopped. Or you went through all of it. And maybe your day got, it's like, it was just clear sailing. Notice that too of like, wow, I did it. I felt clear and it was just like, which is fine too. It's not like it needs to be intense. And it's not like it needs to be clear sailing. We're just noticing what happened. And if like it was intense and you slowed it down, you're like, hey, yeah, I noticed it's a little intense. I can dial it back a bit and just notice what came out of those 4 to 12 hours. And if you slowed it down, did it go longer? And your new perspective now of like, I was feeling that probably just yesterday, but man, compared to who I am now, I can see the change. Because it's going to be, this is going fundamentally deep level, right? And it's going to like bubble up as really natural. And like, you're not going to be forcing this, I'm this new person. So you're going to like radically change, but you want to pay attention, be like, wow, wait a second. In less than a day, I'm radically seeing things different. In less than a week, I'm radically seeing difference. In less than a couple weeks, I'm fundamentally starting to pivot. I'm seeing things differently. You want to be aware of that, like, oh my gosh, because you realize that you're doing it. And then you come back and you keep doing the work gates and you keep getting the change. Because this, I mean, you're starting to go really, really fast. And I just want to, well, I won't put it in there yet. I'll tell you later in the course of why you want to keep going. Another reason why you want to keep going, why you want to keep getting change. Because you're making a fundamental big change, right? That's like kind of like almost like that small pivot, and it's going to massively change further down the road. And you're only beginning to start experiencing the massive pivots you're changing, the massive pivots that you're having where you're taking out these major rocks, right? But it's like everything's moving slowly, but everything is moving versus up here, like at that surface where you're like, it seems like, oh my gosh, that's a huge change, but it can get rewritten so quickly versus we're taking major things out, which don't get rewritten because it's the major underlying programming where you're saying like, yeah, no, we're not gonna do that anymore. And you're not going to all of a sudden regress back to a child where you completely helpless and you have to rechain like this again. No, you're clearing that out. You know, your future is bright. So good job on being here for rest and review. It is super important. It will accelerate everything. I mean, you're kicked out the warp gates. You've already made that change. This is just another way to accelerate it and really get that like conscious mind feedback to where you start like really getting and feeling it. We'll get into the feeling of it and we'll be clearing on that too, so you don't have to worry about any of that because we got that. But it's just like getting that deeper sense is, oh, it's so wonderful. So rest and review is really good. And until we talk again, have a blessed day or a blessed night.